The heat shimmered off the dunes like ripples on water, distorting the endless stretch of golden sand before Dr. Elias Hargrove's weary eyes. It had been weeks since his team began the excavation near the barren edges of the Saharan desert, chasing whispers of a forgotten civilization. Supplies were running low, morale was lower, and Elias knew that funding for his research was hanging by a thread. His assistants had begged him to call off the search, but something deep within him, a hunch he couldn't shake, kept him pressing forward. Elias crouched down, gripping a brush in one hand and a spade in the other. The tip of his boot had accidentally struck something hard beneath the sand, not the soft resistance of stone or the empty crunch of buried pottery, but something different. Metal, perhaps? Or wood? He set to work clearing away the layers of sand, his pulse quickening with every stroke. After what felt like an eternity, he revealed a corner of something extraordinary, a rectangular, ornate object, slightly larger than a coffin. The sunlight caught a glint of gold. The object was a sarcophagus, Elias realized, though its craftsmanship was unlike anything he'd seen before. The surface shimmered with intricate carvings, glyphs, and symbols that seemed both Egyptian and alien, like they belonged to a culture that predated anything in recorded history. Its sides were lined with geometric patterns that spiraled in toward the center, where an unmistakable motif of a starburst shone with an iridescent glow. Elias called for his assistant, Miriam, who came running from the dig site. "This is it!" Elias shouted, his voice hoarse with excitement. "Get the cameras, the brushes, everything. This changes everything." As Miriam scrambled to gather the tools, Elias couldn't wait. He reached out, his fingers brushing the lid of the sarcophagus. The moment his skin made contact, a jolt of energy surged up his arm. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming. His vision blurred, and he felt as if the world tilted sideways, the scorching heat of the desert replaced by a cool, infinite darkness. Elias fell to his knees, gasping. Shapes began to emerge in his mind's eye, scenes of a world so vivid and alien that it defied explanation. He saw towering obelisks that seemed to pulse with their own light, and a sprawling city suspended above the clouds, its streets paved with gold and lined with crystalline spires. Beings of light and shadow moved among the structures, their forms fluid and otherworldly. He tried to shake the visions away, but they kept coming, faster and faster. His mind raced as he saw strange devices, machines powered not by fuel or electricity, but by the stars themselves. There was a sense of purpose, of knowledge beyond comprehension, but also of danger. And then he saw it, a massive star map carved into the heavens, its constellations swirling with light and motion. In its center was a single glyph he recognized from the sarcophagus, glowing brighter than the rest. Just as suddenly as the visions began, they stopped. Elias collapsed onto the sand, trembling and gasping for breath. The sarcophagus glowed faintly now, as if it had shared its secret and gone dormant once more. Miriam knelt beside him, panic etched into her face. "Dr. Hargrove, are you okay?" "What happened?" she asked, shaking his shoulder. Elias looked up at her, his eyes wild. "It's not just a mummy," he whispered. This is a doorway." "A doorway?" Miriam asked, confused. "What are you talking about?" "I don't know how to explain it," Elias muttered, his voice trembling. "But whatever is in here, it's not from this world." The sun sank lower on the horizon, painting the desert in hues of amber and red. The sarcophagus gleamed like a beacon under the dying light, daring Elias to uncover more of its mystery. As Miriam stared at him, he clutched at his chest, feeling the pulse of the visions still coursing through his veins. Unbeknownst to either of them, the amulet resting in the mummy's hands had begun to glow softly, as if responding to its new keeper. The desert wind stirred, carrying with them the faintest whisper of an ancient language, words Elias didn't yet understand, but soon would. For the first time in weeks, Elias felt alive, not just with the thrill of discovery, but with the growing certainty that he had uncovered something far greater than he had ever imagined. Something that could change the very course of human history or end it. The glow of the sarcophagus lingered in Elias's mind long after the sun had set. Back at his makeshift camp, he sat in the dim light of a flickering lantern, the amulet he'd pried from the mummy's grasp now resting in his palm. Its weight was heavier than he'd expected, and its design was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The jade surface shimmered faintly, etched with an intricate pattern of glyphs that seemed to shift subtly when viewed from different angles. Miriam entered the tent, carrying a mug of tea. "You've been staring at that thing for hours," she said, placing the mug on the table beside him. "You need to sleep, Elias." "I can't," he replied, his voice distant. "This amulet. It's more than an artifact. I can feel it." He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "It's alive somehow. It's trying to tell me something." Miriam crossed her arms, concern etched into her face. "Elias, you've been out in the sun too long. Artifacts don't talk." Elias didn't respond. He couldn't explain what he had experienced, how, the moment he touched the amulet, his mind had been flooded with visions. The amulet wasn't just an object, it was a key, and it had unlocked something within him. But what? He turned his attention back to the glyphs, tracing them with his fingertip. They weren't traditional hieroglyphs, at least not from any civilization he knew. Yet they felt familiar, as if their meaning was just out of reach. Grabbing a notebook, Elias began sketching the symbols, comparing them to the photographs and notes he'd compiled over the years. Hours passed. Miriam eventually left, muttering something about stubbornness, but Elias didn't notice. The amulet's glow seemed to grow brighter the more he studied it, as though responding to his focus. Finally, something clicked. "It's a map," he whispered to himself. The realization came like a lightning bolt. The amulet wasn't just decorative, it contained a star map, hidden within the patterns of its glyphs. With trembling hands, Elias began to overlay the symbols against astronomical charts he had saved on his laptop. Slowly, painstakingly, he pieced it together. The amulet's map depicted a specific region of the sky, with a cluster of stars that didn't match any known constellations. Elias leaned back in his chair, his heart pounding. "This isn't from Earth," he muttered. "It can't be." Just as he reached this conclusion, the amulet pulsed with light, flooding the tent with an eerie green glow. Elias dropped it in surprise, and it landed on the table with a dull thud. The glow intensified, and suddenly, the air around him felt heavy, charged with static. Then he heard a voice, not spoken but resonating within his mind. "Ankanu, keeper of the celestial gate. He who holds the key to the stars." Elias froze, his breath caught in his throat. "Who's there?" he stammered, his eyes darting around the empty tent. The voice spoke again, calm but commanding. "You have awakened the legacy of the ancients. The amulet is your guide. Through it, you will find the way." And just like that, the glow faded. The air lightened, the static dissipated, and the tent fell silent once more. Elias stared at the amulet, his hands shaking. The voice, it had felt real, as if it had been spoken directly into his soul. When Miriam returned an hour later, she found him pacing frantically, surrounded by maps, notebooks, and diagrams. "Elias, what's going on?" she asked, startled by the state of the tent. "I know what it is," he said, his voice filled with a manic energy. "The amulet isn't just some artifact, it's a key. And it's telling me where to go." Miriam frowned. "Go where?" "To the stars," Elias said simply. "Or at least, to the place where the stars will guide us." Miriam gave him a skeptical look. "You're not making any sense." "I don't have time to explain." Elias snapped, then immediately softened. "Listen, there's a place the locals call the Breath of the Gods. It's a part of the desert no one dares to go, a place of strange lights and disappearing caravans. The star map points directly there." "Elias, that sounds like a death wish," Miriam said, crossing her arms. "Maybe," he admitted. "But I can't ignore this." This amulet's connected to something bigger. Something ancient. And I have to find out what. Miriam sighed, her expression torn between exasperation and worry. You're not going alone, she said finally. If you're going to chase after whatever this is, I'm coming with you. Elias nodded, a mixture of relief and gratitude washing over him. Thank you, he said. I don't know what we'll find out there, but I have a feeling it's going to change everything. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Elias and Miriam packed their gear and prepared to set out into the unknown. The amulet hung around Elias's neck, its faint glow visible even in the growing daylight. The desert awaited, vast and mysterious, and somewhere within it lay the answers Elias had been searching for his entire life. The journey to the place known as the Breath of the Gods was grueling. The sand stretched endlessly, rippling like a golden sea beneath the blazing sun. Elias and Miriam traveled for hours in silence, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. The amulet around Elias's neck pulsed faintly, a rhythmic glow that seemed to intensify as they neared their destination. It was as though the artifact itself were guiding them, an unseen hand pulling them forward. By mid-afternoon, the terrain began to change. The rolling dunes gave way to jagged outcroppings of black stone, their surfaces pockmarked and smooth as if scorched by some ancient fire. The air grew eerily still, the constant desert wind reduced to a faint whisper. Even the camels seemed uneasy, their movements skittish and hesitant. This place feels wrong, Miriam murmured, breaking the silence. Her eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of danger. Elias nodded, his own unease growing with each step. It's not natural, he said. But it's where we're meant to be. As they pressed on, they came upon a massive circular depression in the desert floor. The sands within the depression were unnaturally smooth, glinting like glass under the sunlight. At the center of the circle stood a monolithic structure, half buried in the sand. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, tall and angular, with shimmering surfaces that seemed to shift between stone and metal. Glyphs identical to those on the amulet covered its surface, glowing faintly with an unearthly light. Elias dismounted his camel and approached the structure, his heart pounding. The amulet grew warmer against his chest, its glow matching the rhythm of the glyphs on the monolith. Miriam followed closely behind, her hand resting on the hilt of the knife strapped to her belt. "What is this place?" she whispered. Elias ran his fingers over the glyphs, marveling at their intricate patterns. "A gateway," he said softly. "It has to be." Without warning, the amulet flared brightly, and the glyphs on the monolith began to shift and rearrange themselves. A deep hum resonated through the air, growing louder with each passing moment. The sands around them began to stir, spiraling upward in a vortex that encircled the monolith. "Elias, what's happening?" Miriam shouted over the rising wind. "I don't know," he yelled back. "But I think we're about to find out." The amulet tugged against the chain around Elias's neck, pulling him closer to the monolith. He hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and held the amulet up to the structure. As soon as the two connected, the hum reached a deafening pitch, and a beam of light shot skyward from the top of the monolith, piercing the atmosphere and scattering the clouds above. The ground beneath their feet trembled as the monolith began to shift, its surface rippling like liquid metal. A doorway began to form in the center, a swirling portal of light and shadow that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. "Elias, this is insane!" Miriam shouted, her voice laced with fear. "We don't know what's on the other side. We've come too far to stop now." Elias replied, his voice firm despite the fear knotting in his stomach. He stepped forward, the amulet still clutched in his hand. The portal seemed to respond to his presence, expanding and stabilizing as he approached. With a final glance back at Miriam, Elias stepped through. The transition was instantaneous. One moment, Elias was surrounded by the blistering heat of the desert. The next, he was weightless, floating in a void of stars and swirling colors. The air was cool and electric, filled with the faint hum of distant energy. He felt as though he were drifting through a living cosmos, the boundaries of space and time bending around him. Ahead of him, a massive structure loomed. It was a station of some kind, suspended in the void like an island in a cosmic sea. Its architecture was unlike anything Elias could comprehend, organic and geometric at once, with spires and arches that seemed to grow naturally out of the structure. Light pulsed through its walls, flowing like liquid veins. As Elias drifted closer, a beam of light extended from the station, enveloping him and pulling him toward an entrance. He landed gently on a platform inside the structure, the ground beneath his feet glowing faintly with every step. The amulet around his neck pulsed in sync with the station's lights, as though it were communicating with the structure. Before he could take another step, a figure appeared before him, a being of pure light, its form shifting and fluid. It had no discernible features, yet Elias felt a presence, ancient and wise. "You have arrived, Keeper," the being said, its voice resonating directly in his mind. "You hold the key to the celestial gate." Elias stared in awe. "Who are you?" he asked. "We are the Anunnaki, the architects of the gateways between worlds. You have awakened a legacy that has slumbered for eons. Through you, the knowledge of the stars shall be reborn." Elias struggled to process the being's words. "Why me? I'm just an archaeologist. The amulet chose you, as it has chosen others before you. Through it, you are connected to the stars, to the gateways, and to the knowledge of the ancients. But be warned, the key is a gift and a burden. The gateway is not without its dangers." Before Elias could ask more, the vision began to fade, and he felt himself pulled back through the void. Moments later, he was standing once again in the desert, the monolith behind him silent and still. Miriam rushed to his side, her eyes wide with relief and confusion. "What happened? Where did you go?" she demanded. Elias clutched the amulet tightly, his mind racing. "I've seen the other side," he said breathlessly. "And it's more than I ever imagined." As the sun set over the desert, Elias knew his journey was far from over. The gateway had been opened, and the secrets of the stars awaited. But with those secrets came a responsibility he could barely comprehend, a responsibility that would change the course of humanity forever. The desert night stretched vast and cold, the stars above sparkling with an eerie clarity. Elias sat in silence, staring at the amulet in his hand as the events of the day replayed in his mind. The revelation of the Anunnaki, the cosmic gateway, and the station beyond had left him reeling. Miriam sat beside him, her usual skepticism replaced by a quiet wariness. She had seen the portal, felt the hum in the air, and now even she couldn't deny that something extraordinary was happening. "You're different," Miriam said finally, breaking the silence. "Since you touched that amulet. Since you stepped through that portal. What happened to you in there?" Elias didn't respond right away. The words of the Anunnaki echoed in his mind. The key is a gift and a burden. He turned the amulet over in his hand, watching the glyphs shimmer faintly under the moonlight. "I saw things, Miriam. Things that I can't explain. Knowledge. A sense of purpose. But it's more than that." She frowned. "What do you mean?" Elias looked at her, his eyes glinting with a mix of wonder and fear. "I'm connected to it now. To the gateway. To the stars. I feel it, like a pulse in the back of my mind. And the Anunnaki, they told me it's my responsibility to protect it." "Protect what?" Miriam asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "The gateways," Elias said. "They're not just doorways to other worlds, they're part of something much bigger. A network that connects entire galaxies, maybe even universes. The Anunnaki built them, but they've been dormant for eons. The amulet is one of the keys, and now it's mine." Miriam shook her head. "Elias, this is insane. You're just one person. How are you supposed to protect something like that?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But the Anunnaki warned me that the gateway isn't just a gift. It's a target. There are others out there. Beings who want to control it or destroy it. And if that happens, it could unravel everything. Miriam's expression darkened. Unravel what? The balance, Elias said, his voice almost a whisper. The gateway doesn't just connect worlds. It keeps them in harmony. Without it, the fabric of reality itself could collapse. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of Elias's words hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Miriam sighed and stood up. Well, if that's the case, you're not doing this alone, she said firmly. Elias blinked in surprise. What? You heard me, she said. If this thing is as important as you say it is, then you're going to need help. You're smart, Elias, but you're not invincible. And you're definitely not a warrior. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Fair point. The next day, they returned to the site of the gateway to examine the monolith more closely. To Elias's relief, it was still dormant, its glyphs dark and lifeless. He ran his fingers over the surface, feeling the faint residual energy beneath. It's sleeping, he murmured. For now, Miriam said. But if it can be opened, someone else could figure out how to do it. That's what I'm afraid of, Elias said. He pulled a small notebook from his pack and began sketching the glyphs and symbols on the monolith, cross-referencing them with the notes he had taken from the amulet. As he worked, Miriam kept watch, scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. By midday, Elias had pieced together more of the monolith's purpose. This isn't the only gateway, he said, his voice tinged with excitement. It's part of a larger network, like I thought. But each gateway is tied to a specific key. Without the right amulet, it can't be activated. So as long as you have that, Miriam said, gesturing to the amulet, this one's safe? Safe from activation, yes, Elias said. But that doesn't mean others won't come looking for it. Or for me. Miriam frowned. So what do we do? Elias straightened, his expression resolute. We prepare. Over the next several weeks, Elias and Miriam set up a hidden base near the gateway. Using the funds Elias had saved from his previous excavations, they gathered equipment, supplies, and research materials. Miriam proved invaluable, her practicality and resourcefulness balancing Elias's single-minded focus on deciphering the amulet's secrets. As Elias delved deeper into the knowledge the amulet had unlocked, he began to understand just how vast and intricate the Anunnaki's network was. Each gateway connected to a different star system, and each system contained its own key. The network was a masterpiece of cosmic engineering, but it was also fragile. If even one gateway fell into the wrong hands, it could destabilize the entire system. Elias's connection to the amulet grew stronger with time. He began to experience flashes of inside glimpses of other gateways, other worlds. He saw alien landscapes bathed in twin suns, massive structures carved from living stone, and civilizations long since vanished. But he also saw shadows figures moving through the gateways, their intentions dark and malevolent. One night, as Elias sat alone in the desert, staring up at the stars, he felt the weight of his new role settle fully on his shoulders. He wasn't just an archaeologist anymore. He was a guardian, the keeper of a power that transcended human understanding. And though the burden was immense, he knew he couldn't turn away from it. The gateway loomed silently behind him, its glyphs glinting faintly under the moonlight. It was a reminder of the journey he had begun, a journey that would take him to the farthest reaches of the cosmos and test the limits of his courage and resolve. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Elias stood and turned back toward the camp. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face it. The stars awaited, and Elias Hargrove would be their guardian.